gotta love that Oaklander. Wanna see that Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. East of heaven with our new exit on 287. We can be seen on Channel 20. That's our Channel 20. Oaklander, gotta love that Oaklander. Wanna see that Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. Love it. Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. Oaklander, Oaklander, Oakland TV. Love it. Catch our fall season.
Good evening once again, and welcome to a very special 50th edition of the Oaklander. I'm your host, Al DiGiacomo. Back in February 1926, Black History Week was established by Carter G. Woodson and recently adopted nationally as Black History Month to help re-educate our society of the great contributions Africans have given the world since the dawn of mankind. Although in the past these important facts were not visibly highlighted for all to see, but through the works being done by learned scholars such as our guest tonight, we can all share the benefits from a culture that dates back to where time began. To celebrate this occasion, we have as our guest Professor Muhammad Abdul Rahman. Professor Muhammad has a BA in Biology and Chemistry from Denver University, has studied at the Graduate School of Chemistry of Rutgers University, and has traveled abroad to Senegal, West Africa, where he studied anthropology and history. Thank you for being our guest here tonight and sharing your knowledge in a lecture format.
I'm very honored.
Professor, you've broken tonight's lecture into 3 segments. As we begin, could you tell us the main scope of your research?
Yes. The main scope of my research is African history. If I had the opportunity to talk in great detail, we could be here for quite a long time.
What is the timing of your average lecture if you were?
Maybe about three or 4 hours.
Okay.
Okay, because the history is so, the scope, the magnitude of it, it's so profound, it requires quite a bit of time. So in the interest of conservation, I shall try and be brief. And as you mentioned, the subject that I want to talk about tonight will entail humanity, civilization, and culture. There's nothing new in the cultural level of African history. However, what is new is the way in which I am introducing the history of Africa, because I am trying to make the history of Africa more intelligible, better understood. When I was a young boy going to school, there was a common belief that Africa had no history. And when we went to school and we went to church, there was a common belief that the cradle of humanity was in a place called Mesopotamia. That was a belief because of 3 reasons. One, the biblical explanation, which is the Garden of Eden. And secondly, Asia is a place where 3 races of people live, black, white, and yellow. And then finally, with the finding of the man of Java in 1893, all of the anthropologists were united to say that Asia was the cradle of humanity. However, today, with the advent of newly discovered sciences, prehistoric archaeology, human paleontology, and the staggering field of molecular biology, now we have come to know that the cradle of humanity is there in the Great Lakes regions of Africa, which in fact is almost in the very heart of Africa. Perhaps you have heard of Dr. Leakey. Dr. Leakey was the most celebrated paleoanthropologist of the 20th century. And in 1971, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, he made a staggering pronouncement that it was not scientifically possible that a being could be born in an area such as Kenya with its latitude and Ethiopia, and that being could not be complexion. That being could not be black, because if a being were born in an area with the latitude of Kenya and that being was not heavily pigmented with melanin, that individual would not have any protection against the ultraviolet rays of the sun.
For sure. Right.
Hence, we can conclude that the first Homo sapiens sapien was undoubtedly a black African. Okay? And in 1974, a paleoanthropologist by the name of Donald Johanson, he found in Hadar, Ethiopia, the remains of a woman that was 3 feet tall, and he gave her the common name Lucy, and it was subsequently given the scientific name Australopithecus afarensis. And from that fossil came a series of 6 other fossils that lead from Australopithecus africanus to Australopithecus boisei, and Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and the Homo sapiens sapien, modern humans or modern man as we are now.
Right.
And that Homo sapiens sapien, the first one, appeared in the Omo Valley over 150,000 years ago.
150,000 years ago.
Yes.
How did they come about defining the, I guess, the neighborhood of the age of that?
Yes. There's a chemical technique which is known as potassium argon. There is also another technique which is known as carbon 14.
Right.
Carbon 14 is only accurate up until 50,000 years, but potassium argon is accurate up into millions of years. So the technique of potassium argon is the preferred technique for carbon dating, or what they call radioisotope dating, to determine the age of fossil findings.
I see.
Yes. And so now with the appearance of Homo sapiens sapiens in the Great Lakes regions of Africa, those Homo sapiens sapiens migrated to the Nile Valley, and there they created the great civilization that we know today as Egypt. But by the time those Homo sapiens sapiens were living in the Nile Valley, there were neither white nor yellow races existing in the world. Humanity was homogeneous, it was African, and it was all black. During the coldest period of the history of the earth, which lasted for 600,000 years, those Africans who were living in the Great Lakes region, they migrated to Europe by Spain, and the migrational process took 40,000 years. Once they entered Europe, they remained in the cold for an additional 20,000 years. The rate and process of those changes can be followed to the birth of a man which is called the man of Cro-Magnon, or the Cro-Magnon man. But however, the first Homo sapien to live in Europe was undoubtedly a black African. There were many scholars who knew, and they were fully aware of this phenomenal migration of Africans who migrated into Europe. However, they did not convey the truth. They gave the truth in upside-down explanation. And these facts are highly bounded in the levels of chronology. The first African to live in Europe was an African who was very dwarfed, about 4 feet tall, and the name that was given to him was Grimaldian man. And as a result of the Grimaldian man living in the cold and undergoing morphological changes and mutations, then appeared a man which is called the Cro-Magnon man. As I stated earlier, it is a striking fact that the first inhabitant to live in Europe was undoubtedly a black African. Molecular biology has not yet come to explain in a completely satisfying way how these Africans who left Africa and migrated into Europe and remained in the cold have now given birth to European people. However, the pedigree and differences can be fully explained. For example, in the subcontinent of India, there are a group of people known as the Dravidians. They are very dark, exceedingly dark, but they have hair as straight as any European. In the island of Melanesia, you have Africans, some who have blonde hair, some who have brunette hair, or even red hair. In the islands of Melanesia, that word itself comes from the word melanos, which means the blackest of black. In the Solomon Islands, you find Africans there who have blonde hair. So in the beginning, it was a single humanity. that was all African, and it dispersed itself throughout the earth. First beginning as very dwarf people. You may know of them as the pygmies. That, however, is a European term, but they call themselves the Twa. Their average height is about 4 feet tall. You find them in Zaire and the Congo and the Cameroons. You will find them in Malaysia. You will find them in the Philippine Islands, in New Guinea. They were all over the earth, but now they are mostly found in the rainforest, or for example, in the hills of India or the hills of the Philippine Islands. If you come back to Africa, you will discover that Africa, the continent itself, is like a giant test tube where there is so much genetic and biological diversity. You will find the shortest people in the earth to the tallest people in the earth. The tallest people that live in the earth are called the Dinkas. They live in the Sudan. Another tall people who live in that region are called the Nuer. And in Kenya and Tanzania, you have the Maasai, okay? Then if you come back into the southern part of Africa, you will find the intermediate stages. Some people that are called the Khoi or the Sand Khoi. You will find the men with germinating stomachs, and the women with steatopegia. This means that there's fatty tissue development in the abdomen and also in the posterior.
And these were all to fit the way that they lived.
These were all mutations that occurred over thousands of years that enabled the Africans, as they moved into new environments, to adapt to their environment, and then to take those characteristics, those biological characteristics, and pass them on to their offsprings to enable their offsprings to survive, and simultaneously pass those genetic characteristics also to their offsprings. So Africa is the continent that has more genetic diversity than any other continent in the earth. Okay, all right?
Sure.
Okay.
From that point, we have a multitude of diversity. We have a harmonious development that is being developed at this point. Is this what you're saying? Is as the civilizations fanned out through Asia
Yes.
and through Europe,
Yes.
they were able to, again, to adapt to their new locations?
Yes.
And to take their knowledge and to set up new civilizations?
Yes.
Throughout the new continents?
In fact, we know now that as the Africans migrated throughout the earth, in China, in Japan, the first civilizations that existed in the south of China, there were a group of Africans that were known as the Khmers. They built the first civilization in China. They built the first civilizations in India, in Harappa, the Mohenjo-daro. These were civilizations when the Aryans conquered India roughly 3,000 years ago. The question was asked, where did these ancient civilizations of Harappa and the Mohenjo-daro, where did they come from? There was an excavation done in 1920, and it demonstrated that these were pre-Aryan civilizations that were created by the original people of India. And now the original people of India, they have been pushed down into southern India by invaders who were actually from Western Asia. And you will still find the vestiges of those civilizations in southern India today by the original people of India that are called the Dravidians. And you will find these people throughout Asia, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. And the very first people who lived in China, as I mentioned, and also Japan, were also African people, and they built civilizations there. When I was in Senegal as a student, there were a group of Japanese scientists who came to Senegal to meet Cheikh Anta Diop, who was one of the great scientists, perhaps the greatest scientific historian of the 20th century. And they came to Senegal to meet Cheikh Anta Diop, and they said that they had found vestiges of an African civilization in Japan. And so they came to Senegal to confer with Cheikh Anta Diop to validate his theory that the first people to live in Asia were undoubtedly black Africans. So this concept of Africans migrating throughout the world is very evident. You can go into Central America, South America, you will find vestiges of an African civilization which was called the Olmecs, which was found in Mexico, Colombia. This is pre-Aztec, pre-Mayan civilization. You can even go into parts of North America and you'll find vestiges of that same civilization.
Was the migration due as an exploration, or was it just for a quest for food? What was the motivation? Was there a certain motivation, or was it just to look for happier hunting grounds? Or
that's a very good question. What is fundamental to man? There is an inherent desire in man to know.
To learn.
Fact, to know and to learn. In fact, if you look at the word science, if you study the root, the etymology of that word in Latin, it translates into a word in Latin which is called scire, which means to know or to have knowledge of all things. And so that is the quest of man, is to know and to discover and to learn.
Very good. So they were out to learn.
Absolutely.
And once they got to these new places and they did learn, basically it was all not scribed down at this point. Was it all word to mouth?
Well, what we find is that, for example, if we come back to ancient Egypt, which is a Greek word, but Egypt, the name for Egypt actually was Kemet. Okay, they had a language which is called the Medu Neter. Okay, that language actually transmits into the words of nature. They actually wrote their history down. However, when the Greeks and some of the other Aryans came to Egypt as conquerors, they did not understand the Greek language. Okay, so they transliterated many of the words without having the knowledge of what the ancient Egyptians were actually writing. So a lot of that knowledge has not been passed on in its proper context. But it was not only an oral history, but it was also a written history.
Very good, very good. We'll be back with Professor Muhammad after this short public service message. I hope you'll stay with us. Don't go away.
Every evening, before I go to sleep, I look outside my window at the moon above the trees. And I think that somewhere else, someone else is looking out a different window at the same moon. I imagine that this person is imagining me.
Welcome back to the program as we explore Black History Month with Professor Rahman. Professor, with your many years of studying anthropology, where did civilization begin?
Yes, that's a very good question. If we come back to Africa and we look at the appearance of Homo sapiens sapiens again, the oldest Homo sapien to date first appeared in the Omo Valley. The Omo Valley is in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is the site where modern humans first appeared. From Ethiopia and Nubia, which is present-day Sudan, this civilization that was in Ethiopia, Nubia, and it migrated to Egypt. We know that Egypt was populated by Africans who came from the south, which is the Great Lakes region, in the Upper Paleolithic period, okay? And this means that those Africans who migrated to Egypt, there they built this great civilization that I mentioned earlier. In 1974, at the University of Cairo, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, who was a nuclear physicist, a scientist, a mathematician, a linguist, an anthropologist, and an Egyptologist, he asked UNESCO to sponsor an international colloquium where scholars would convene at the University of Cairo from all over the world to exchange anthropological, scientific evidence on the origin of Pharaonic Egypt. This conference, it lasted from 10 days, 7 in the morning to 11 at night. And Dr. Diop, he used physical anthropology, he used linguistics, he used cultural anthropology, and he also used written records there were some eyewitnesses who saw the Egyptians, mainly Herodotus, who is known as the father of history, who was a Greek. And Dr. Diop demonstrated that the Egyptian civilization, it was indeed an African civilization. And from ancient Egypt, Africa, came science, language, writing, agriculture, music, dance. All of these sciences that we are studying today actually came from Africa.
More or less the birth of modern civilization.
Absolutely. In fact, there's one professor of emeritus of anthropology, one of the greatest anthropologists of the 20th century. His name was Ashley Montague. He wrote a book which is entitled An Introduction to Physical Anthropology. And in this book, he makes a very staggering pronouncement. And that pronouncement was that from Africa came the knowledge that has enabled the Western world to send a rocket to the moon, to split the atom, and to be able to determine the biochemical structure of the DNA molecule. During a period known as the Hellenic period, many Greek scholars, they came to Egypt, not as teachers, but as students. The first Greek scholar who came to Egypt, his name was Thales. Thales studied in Egypt, and when he left Egypt and went back to Greece, he went to Greece with a theory that is known as the theory of the 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and rain. This theorem was written in the scrolls 2,500 years before the birth of Thales. Thales told Pythagoras, remember in the 10th grade that theorem which was known as the Pythagorean theorem?
A triangle.
Yes, c squared equals a squared plus b squared, or the hypotenuse is equal to the opposite side and the adjacent side of a right triangle. Exactly. That is not the theorem of Pythagoras, but that is an Egyptian theorem. Again, that was written in the scrolls several thousand years before the birth of Pythagoras. Many Greek scholars came to Egypt and they learnt this knowledge from the Egyptians. Philosophy is not of Greek origin, but it is of Egyptian origin. Even the word, you can begin to see it is not actually a Greek word, it's an African word. The word sage, the word for sage, or sofer, which means wisdom, okay? So the concept of philosophy was already developed in Africa even before Europe became city-states. If you begin to look throughout Africa, you will find that Africa had a high level of civilization in mathematics, in science, in astronomy, in philosophy, even the science of mummification. They had almost developed to a level of conquering life over death, if you really look at how they were able to preserve the human body. They irrigated the Nile Valley, they developed agriculture, all of this, the domestication of plant species and animal species, all of this knowledge came from ancient Africa.
And very, very close. I mean, we've seen brain surgery
Yes.
and studying of just the natural energies of the universe by using crystals,
Yes.
quartz, turquoise, garnet.
Yes.
I believe they use garnet. Also, the whole philosophy of life and civilization had already been deeply embedded, is what you're conveying
Yes.
tonight.
Yes. The Africans had already developed a very high level of spiritual civilization. If you look at Western civilization has been able to send a rocket to the moon, as I mentioned earlier, and to have been able to split the atom, and they have been able to develop a high level of technology. But in the human level, Western civilization has failed. Juxtaposing that to Africa, Africa's civilization was not a material civilization. African civilization is a spiritual civilization. If you look at the civilization of Egypt, Ethiopia, Nubia, and even coming into the Western Sudan, which is known for Ghana, Songhay, and Male, okay? Or even the civilizations that were in North Africa, the Carthaginians, or the Garamantes. These civilizations are destroyed now. For when the Romans came in, they destroyed most of North Africa. But North Africa was not a very arid land. The Sahara is a recent endeavor into Africa. Okay? There were highly developed civilizations in North Africa. And all of them, again, they were based on spiritual civilization.
I would presume that this is the reason why it's taken so long to bring this to the fore, where the European way of acquiring possessions,
Yes.
and where we find ourselves needing a deeper sense of spirituality to know who we all are, because we all come from the same place.
Yes. What has happened in European civilization is almost tantamount. It is tantamount to committing moral suicide. And if I had time to go into the explanation of what has happened in European philosophy, they have confused the concept of spirit and matter.
Well said.
Yes, they have confused the concepts of spirit and matter, and this is why now Western civilization has gone to its apogee. It has almost gone to in fact, it has gone to its furthest extent. It can no longer develop in a productive way. It is now spiraling downward.
Is this why more people today are maybe getting back into a religious mode, or dabbling with other forms of meditation? In our first segment, you spoke of the Aryans.
Yes.
We're not talking about people from Germany now.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking of a different tribe that came down and invaded India.
That's right. They invaded India.
Where did the origin of yoga, did that come out of the philosophy from in African in nature, or was it brought in by the Aryans?
That knowledge, if you study these concepts, and what I am conveying to you, this knowledge I'm conveying to you, it is highly bounded in the levels of chronology. There are many scholars who knew that Africa was the origin of humanity and the cradle of civilization. What has happened, Al, is that many scholars, they saw the truth, but they gave it a deaf ear. In other words, they falsified the history. And these falsifications, they still exist to this very day. However, I am not criticizing or condemning all of the scholars, but because there were scholars in Europe and also in America who were of good faith. Some of those scholars were like Albert Churchward and John Maccabee, Godfrey Higgins. These were Europeans who saw the history of Africa, and they saw the contribution that Africans had made both to humanity and to civilization. They tried honestly to convey this information to their European counterparts.
True men of science.
Yeah, true men of science. Because historians, they must be honest enough to convey what they discover.
Yes.
Scientists, too, they must be honest enough to convey what they discovered. But they were given a deaf ear.
Living a lie.
Absolutely, absolutely. So those men who wrote history, those men who falsified the history, they were not honest enough to accept the true reality of Africa, that it was the origin of humanity and the cradle of civilization. So this was enough reason for them to lean on the history of Europe and to invert the history to make it appear that Africa was a continent that was inhabited by savages, and conversely, Europe, on the other hand, was where civilization began. You see, and so now this is why now we are engaged in such chaos, because now even not only Africans in this country, not only have they been mentally programmed, but European people, white people, have been mentally programmed too, to think that because you're from Europe and you're a European, you're superior to people who come from Africa. You understand?
Because we have possessions?
Well, partly because you have possessions, and then because of your technology, okay? And then because of being who you are, okay? To make it appear that white skin is superior to dark skin, okay? These are all misnomers, and this is why now the world is in a serious crisis, you see, because now color has been totally misunderstood.
Exactly.
You understand?
Sure.
And so now this is why, as we are on the threshold of the 21st century, we have a very critical situation that we must deal with.
Do you think we're going to move closer? Do you think it's inevitable that we will come to the logical conclusion and bind in this eternal circle?
Nothing can stop it. You see, because they are laws. They are physical laws and they are spiritual laws. In all of those spiritual laws and physical laws, they are counterparts of each other. And these laws are based on the laws of nature. You see, what you think or what I think, comparing it to the laws of nature is inconsequential, because you can't stop nature, nor can I. So whether you are willing to accept the truth or if I reject the truth, it's inconsequential. It's already in motion. So nothing can stop it. Remember this, Al. Truth crushed to the earth shall rise. So it would be in the interest of all of us to come together, to put aside our idiosyncrasies so we can try and reconcile our differences so we can save humanity. If we fail in this endeavor, then we fail the totality of humanity.
And with all the years that it has taken, the years that you're speaking of, the 150,000 years, which is a mere speck.
That's right.
In the evolution of the world, would all be laid to waste.
Well, Al, I just started in the level of Homo sapiens sapien. However, humanity antedates that by many millions and millions and millions of years. I only used 150,000 years as a time.
I was just trying to, it's been a long road traveled.
Absolutely, absolutely.
For sure, for sure. What are some of your other studies as you've been on your road of discovery? What are some of the other intricate patterns that you've taken as far as history and anthropology goes? Have you do you study any other aspects of human endeavors?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Al, when you asked me at the very onset, what was the main scope of my work? Actually, the main scope of my work is broken into actually 4 categories: history, culture, science, and spirituality. And I think now, we must understand the history, because if we know the history, then we can learn about our ancestors. And if we know history, then history will give us a better sense of who we are in the present. And once we know who we are in the present, then we can begin to make preparations for the future, okay? And then once we know the history, then we can begin to construct culture. This will be a way that we cultivate ourselves. You understand? To become highly developed. And then the other aspect of what we must have is a proper understanding of science. For if a people fail to properly understand science, they don't exist as a people. They only exist as a population.
or out of a book.
Exactly.
Yes.
You see, and then to balance the history, the culture, and the science, you must have spirituality. Spirituality, however, is different than religion. Religion is symbolic, but spirituality is internal. There are many people who go to the church, the mosque, or the synagogue, but they never find God. But there are, on the other hand, there are people who never go to either church, synagogue, or mosque, but they always are spiritual and they are following the laws of nature. So it's the spirituality that human beings need to develop. Because once we can develop spiritually, that will begin to put us in contact with one another.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Fascinating. Professor, we'll be back in a few moments with Professor Rahman to discuss his new paradigm, a theory of culture. So don't go away. You might miss something. We'll be right back.
The Friends of Ringwood Library announced their Valentine's Day brunch. If you forgot to make reservations for Valentine's Day, don't sweat it. The Friends of Ringwood Library are holding their annual brunch on Sunday, February 14th between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. at the Cupsaw Lake Clubhouse. On the menu is a wide array of brunchables from baked French toast and eggs to eggplant rollatini and pasta with vodka sauce, as well as a variety of mouth-watering homemade baked goods. A special dish will be presented by Servart Bedrosian from Heritage Kitchens, as described in her latest book, The World's Healthiest Diet, A Pure and Simple Guide. Tickets are very reasonably priced at $15 per person. Senior citizens tickets are $10 and children under 10 are $5. Tickets are available at the Ringwood Public Library or by calling 973-835-8453.
Welcome back as we return to our final segment of our 50th program on Cablevision Channel 20. I'm joined with Professor Rahman. Professor, your research is described as multidisciplinary in scope. What is the main focus that you are getting into with your, as regards to cultural identity?
Very good. That's a very good question. When you study the formation of cultural identity it encompasses three related factors. One is the historic factor. Second, there is the linguistic factor. And then there is the psychological factor. All of those factors are a function of your ancestors. And among each people and each society, when you study the elders of that society, their principal goal, their principal obsession is passed on their acquired knowledge to the young. And when that knowledge is not passed on to offsprings, it brings about cultural stagnation among the youth. If you look at America today, there's cultural stagnation among young people today.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because most young people today, and also for adults, they do not have a sense of history. And the only thing that is important in the study of history is to know your ancestors. For if you fail to know your ancestors, obviously you must know someone else's ancestors, or simply you know nothing about ancestors at all. And once you become aware of your ancestors, that's how you receive your inheritance. Not just money, although that has a significance, but your language, your belief system, your value system, your mores, your traditions, your customs.
Yeah.
So language is that second factor that is very important. So when an individual loses his sense of history and his language, then that third factor, which is the psychological factor, they lose their mind. Because psychology, after all, is the study of the mind.
Sure.
Now, there are 4 instances whereby the cultural identity of an individual or a people can become disrupted. It can be brought about by enslavement. It can be brought about by colonization, cultural debasement of those people who have been conquered, and falsification of the history. Me being a black man who has grown up in America, this is what motivated me to study history, the culture, the science, the spirituality, and then to look at what determines cultural identity. And once cultural identity is intact, that gives a people a collective personality. In the case of my people, black people here in America and all over the world, our cultural identity has been disrupted because we have undergone 400 years of enslavement, 200 years of colonization, international colonization, systematic erasing of our history, which is unique and original. And also, we have been culturally debased. Now, as a result of undergoing all of the aforementioned factors that I've noted, this has robbed us of our humanity. And when we have lost our humanity, we have lost our internal freedom, which gives us the sovereignty of our very souls. But not only have we been robbed of our humanity, but if someone is robbing you of your humanity, what does that say about the people who have denied you humanity? You see, that brings into question if they have humanity.
That is very important words to ponder.
Absolutely.
Because we seem to be at that impasse right now where very few of us know who we are.
That's exactly the point.
And we don't know where we're going.
We don't know where we're going, and it's for that reason. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we came from, so we cannot know where we're going because all of us have undergone behavior modification. We have been psychologically engineered through mind control to believe that we are something that in reality we are not. You see?
And this goes into your scientific development, where what a culture must have in order to propagate itself, in order to be healthy and productive.
Exactly. And that's why I developed a theory which is known as a theory of culture, for that specific reason, to generate cultural productivity, mainly among young people who were in the schools, and the school system was not meeting their needs, and they were not educating them so that these young people could overcome their own social realities. Okay? So I developed the theory of culture to provide self-empowerment to these young people, basically by, first of all, teaching them who they are, where they came from, in order for them to know where they're going. And then by giving them proper education. And if you study the root meaning of the word educate in Latin, it means to lead out of. Out of what? To lead out of ignorance. Right. And once you are properly educated, you should become a leader. You see, and you should be capable of leading yourself out of ignorance and then helping your family, your community, and ultimately your society. Because once you are properly educated, fear begins to dissipate.
Do you feel that it has, especially in recent times, everyone now is going into that age of enlightenment where either we're all going to raise our level of knowledge, or I'll be very, very, very blunt. Do you think it's planned and set this way to make sure that the great mass does not take it upon their own to learn too much?
Well, you know,
more or less like a controlled chaos, economic slavery.
Absolutely, and that's what we are dealing with today. You see, slavery in America has been abolished. There are no longer chains on the ankles, or you're not shackled, but there is mental slavery.
Yes.
You see, and psychological slavery. People have been genetically, or I should say, pardon me, psychologically engineered. You see?
Yes.
For example, in the laboratory, now we can train animals to act human. But now we can train humans to act like animals by denying them proper education.
That's frightening.
Absolutely. And so now what we are dealing with in America is a sociological phenomenon that if it continues to go the way in which it is presently going, America is going to deteriorate from its very core. So this is why whenever you find a society that is in the state that America is in presently, someone has to come about to teach spiritual civilization, to try and save humanity, to bring them back to humanity so that they can be human all over again. And so the theory of culture, that's what the paradigm is. It was created to develop a paradigm that could be a framework to properly educate and rehabilitate those young people and adults who had fallen by the wayside.
And for the edification of our viewers at home who aren't familiar with the word paradigm,
Yes.
it's just a new way of walking. It's a new way of looking at something
Yes.
that is totally divergent from the past.
Precisely. If we wanted to say a paradigm is a model, it is a framework. And in the paradigm that I've created, it's a paradigm to create a new human philosophy, a new way of viewing yourself, and a new way of looking at your worldview or looking at the universe.
Could you give us a little example of that?
Yes. You see, once you allow someone else to define you, then you begin to limit your perspective, because after all, they've given you a definition. It's like if you put an animal in a box, right? That animal is dependent on you to feed it, to give it water, you know, or to give it sunlight.
Right.
You understand?
Sure.
And as long as that animal is in the box, then that animal becomes dependent. You see? But if that animal ever comes out of that box, if he or she is to survive, then they have to assume their own responsibility to become governors of their own environment. You see?
Okay.
Okay, and so
Sure.
that's what the theory of culture is all about. It's about self-empowerment. You understand? Teaching those individuals how they must now take the responsibility for themselves.
And it all comes together from education to politics.
Yes, through proper education. Proper education. And what our young people are facing with today, they are in a school system that is against them from kindergarten through the university. You see? So unless they are properly educated, it doesn't mean if they go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or MIT, as long as they do not know who they are, it's inconsequential.
With the intelligentsia that runs Yale and Harvard, do you think that the paradigm shift will ever reach them? Because obviously the paradigm must shift with them,
Yes.
before it filters down to the formidable minds.
That is a very, very good question. But the challenge that we have today, and this is a big struggle, Al, I don't see those universities relenting at all. I think they are going to maintain their positions because they want to maintain the status quo.
Unfortunately, I must agree with you on
exactly.
that. Yes.
And it's going to take people of good faith like yourself and some of the colleagues that you know,
You're very
Cliff
kind.
and myself, who work together and who can rid ourselves of xenophobia, fear. You understand?
Yes.
And who work in the interest of trying to save humanity. That is the only way that this can happen, because after all, Al, people want peace. And the only way that they can have peace in their lives, first they have to deal with self-acceptance. You must accept who you are. See, no one can mandate that you can have freedom. No one can mandate that you can have justice. You understand? These are not civil rights, these are human rights.
Human rights.
These are things that human beings need in order to be human,
To prosper.
to prosper,
Yes.
and to have love and happiness, you know, brotherhood and sisterhood, okay? So these are human qualities that are essential not only for our survival, but for expression of our creativity.
And I also think that this is definitely ingrained in the black culture. From what I have learned from very, very close friends of mine, and again, because of the rote process that you go to school, A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yes.
We all know this. We all know the Columbus thing. We all know
That's right.
Harriet Tubman or George Washington Carver.
Yes.
But the name will escape me of the man who invented blood plasma.
Charles Drew.
Charles Drew,
That's
who
right.
died needing a transfusion.
Absolutely.
If this is not something that will make you think of the contributions that we all benefit from,
Yes.
how the inventions of the light bulb. We all know Thomas Edison. I think it was Louis Latimer.
Louis Latimer.
Who was literally working hand in hand at the same time.
He was a genius, yes. Al, the list is innumerous of blacks, not only who have made contributions of science, but if you study the history, you know, mathematics, science, as I alluded to earlier, all of these concepts, they came from Africa, okay? If you begin to see Africans were the first people to create time. Yes, they created the first calendar over 6,000 years ago. They were aware that there was a leap year, okay? And what they did, the ancient Egyptians recognized that there were 30 days in a month, there were 12 months in a year, 360 days, and they gave a day for the major 5 gods in their country. So that was 365 days, but they also realized that there was a leap year, that every year there was 1/4 of a day.
Professor, how did they know?
Because they had high level of science. They had very high levels of science, and they based their calendar on the appearance of the brightest star, Sirius B, that appeared every 1,460 years. And every time that star appeared in the sky, they would add an entire year to their calendar. You see? So this is how exact and how precise they were, you see. So they used mathematics and they used science to overcome their circumstances and to strike a balance with nature. See, America, again, has made tremendous contributions in science. The Western world has. But they have failed in the human level. See, we can drop a bomb on Japan, right? But now that energy should have been used for purposes to feed the hunger, to feed the hungry. Yes. You understand?
Sure.
And develop more roads for human growth and development, spiritual development. And now we're at an impasse, as you say now, because we're at a point now where there's a collision now.
Which is
culturally, spiritually, politically, economically, yes, educationally. And so we must develop, as I said earlier, a new human philosophy that can ameliorate these conditions.
Professor, it has been a wonderful, wonderful event to have you here in our studios here in Oakland, especially to celebrate our 50th show here. And I want to thank you for coming up and spending the time.
I'm very honored. Is the time up already? I'm just getting started.
I know you are. We'll have to have you back again.
I would be honored too.
Very shortly.
Okay.
I want to thank Professor Muhammad for sharing this time with our viewers. It's been a wonderful and educational experience this evening. Much success to you on your paradigm, A Theory of Culture. And as we turn another milestone of 50 programs, I would like to thank all of you for watching, and all the OKTV staff members, past and present, for making the Oaklander possible, and for letting us into your home on Monday evenings. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the founding members, a dear and close friend of mine, our director, Greg Schess.
Welcome back to our show. Well, now that we have our 50th show for you tonight, it's time again to talk about our purpose and reason for bringing you our show. The Oaklander was originally started with the intention of providing an opportunity for local residents to share their experiences and talents with our viewers. This will always be a main theme in our show, and we welcome anyone to contact us with their ideas and artistic themes. What we have found over the course of these 50 shows is that there are so many wonderful people out there trying to help and reach out to others. This is another important aspect of the Oaklander, and we are proud of the fact that our broadcast has made a difference in people's lives. Where else but on cable television can we offer help to others, a new perspective on our lives, and a musical flair where we all enjoy the many talents of our fellow residents? Now, as we head to the 21st century, we are even more determined to bring you the topics that affect us and our children. Our focus will be on people who are willing to speak their mind, share their stories, and maybe open our eyes to see the world in a different light. Don't be afraid to ask the question just because you don't want to hear the answer. It's your life we're talking about. And that life must include learning and listening to others who may provide a key to your happiness and well-being. We are sitting on the edge of the greatest leap of information technology the world has ever seen. Our use of the internet and cable TV will soon merge to provide unprecedented access to the world and every source of information. Take advantage of this opportunity, for knowledge truly is power. Make a difference in someone's life today. For the Oaklander, I'm Greg Schuss.